Everybody, it's so lovely to see you all here. We try and get the right place for this. As you know, it's the 75th anniversary of Israel's founding this year, and Yom HaTzmaut, Yom HaZikaron, are very important days in our calendar. Some of you were at our synagogue service on Saturday when we had a big celebration of Israel's independence and how important Israel is to all of us. And now we thought it would be very interesting to hear from some of the different groups who were affected by the founding of Israel. And Jews of the Middle East were a very important part of that mix. Israel has been the place for the ingathering of so many different Jews from different places. But the Jews from nearby, from the Middle East, many of whom were displaced at different times, but for whom Israel was a sanctuary, somewhere else comes to other parts of the diaspora. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our wonderful three speakers this evening. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. There's certainly a bit of information about themselves. What was very interesting to read was not just what their backgrounds were, but what they made of themselves since they've been here. And as you'll find, their English is all fantastic. So that's great. But I was particularly interested in Niran because she said in her information that in 2021 she was voted as one of the top 100 influencers in Iraq in a survey on Instagram by the magazine Baghdad Style Street. So I think we've got some important people here, and we've got some business studies teachers and certified accountants. So I think you've made interesting careers for yourselves, but we want to hear the story of your growing up and your leaving Iraq and what happened after that. So very much looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Judy, for welcoming us. I'm talking on behalf of my friends Sharon and Carmen, who I knew from Iraq. So we go a long way. Okay, I would like to give you a bit of background before we talk about how we left Iraq. So I would like to start from the beginning. If you look at the book of Genesis in chapter 2, verse 10, it speaks about a river flowed out of Eden to water the Garden of Eden. This river separated and became 4 rivers. One of them is Gihon, the other one is Pishon, the third one is Tigris, and the fourth one is Euphrates. The last 2 rivers are the rivers of Iraq. So, in fact, if Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, I can only say that Adam and Eve are Iraqis. We go to Abraham, our patriarch. He was born in Ur-Kasdim. This is what's written in the Bible. Ur-Kasdim is Ur now in Iraq. So actually, Abraham is Iraqi as well. I don't know if you know how many prophets are in Iraq. Actually, the number of prophets in Iraq is, the prophets who were buried in Iraq is much larger than the prophets buried in Israel. So there is Ezekiel, there is Ezra the scribe, there is Nahum, Jonah, and Daniel. They were all buried in Iraq. Unfortunately, in the recent years, their shrine has been transformed to be Muslim shrines. For example, the tomb of Ezekiel now is a Shiite site. The shrine of Jonah was bombed by ISIS in 2014. The only good news I can tell you that the shrine of Nahum in Al-Qosh in the Kurdish part of Iraq in the north has been renovated recently, and actually they kept its Jewish character. It's a big project. Okay, so tonight's talk is from Babylon to Israel, but I would like to go a few steps before. And I will start from Israel to Babylon. Babylon or Iraq or Mesopotamia is very important in our Jewish history. So we'll start in 722 BCE. The Israelites from the Kingdom of Israel were exiled from Israel to the north of Iraq by the Assyrians. They were taken to Nineveh, which is Mosul now, where ISIS was recently, and to other places where the Assyrians actually controlled the area. That was done by King Sargon II and his son and successor Sennacherib. The exile resulted in complete disappearance of 10 tribes of Israel who were in the Kingdom of Israel. They're called the 10 lost tribes. Nobody knows where they are now. They just assimilated within the Assyrian culture and other cultures. Then in 597 BCE, Jerusalem, the capital of the Kingdom of Babylonia, was conquered by the Chaldean and the New Babylonian. 6 years later, the king Nebuchadnezzar started deporting the Jews from Jerusalem to Babylon. Babylon is in the south of Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq now. Nebuchadnezzar purposely exiled the most prominent citizens of Judah, professionals, priests, doctors, poets, whoever was the elite of the Jews in Judah's kingdom. And the reason was, he wanted to make sure that actually the Jewish people will not create another kingdom or country. They won't go back to their homeland. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you know the song By the River of Babylon of Boney M, right? Okay. This is the song or the poem that the Jews read when they were exiled to Babylon. Now, the Jews in Babylonia, because they were the elite of the Kingdom of Judah, they actually managed to create a community. And at a later stage, they became an authority, a worldwide authority in Judaism and its practices. And they produced one of the important documents that we use, which is the Babylonian Talmud. It all was made in Iraq, or in Babylonia. Now, in synagogues, we pray for, or we bless the king and the queen, or the royal family. This is what Jeremiah asked the Jews who were exiled to Babylon to pray for the leaders, because with their peace, if they can create peace, then we will be in peace. I would like to quote. In this letter it says, "Build houses, dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and have sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they might bear sons and daughters and multiply and do not diminish. And seek the peace of the city, in which I caused you to be exiled, and pray unto God for it, and for it in its peace you shall have peace. So when a country is in peace and happy, the Jews in this country will be happy. That's the reason we pray. Even in Iraq, we prayed for terrible leaders. We had to pray. So if you see that the history of the Jews of Iraq is actually over 2,600 years, from the exile to now. I would like to go to a nearer era and talk about when the Ottoman Empire was defeated in the First World War, and Iraq became under the British mandate. The British mandate actually established the monarchy in Iraq in 1921. The first Minister of Finance was a Jew, Sasson Hezkel. Jews were actually in parliament. There were judges, there were doctors, there were businessmen. They actually were a very important part of the creation of the new modern Iraq. Now, life for Jews were not always rosy. There were ups and downs. And the Jews were not spared of the evil of Nazism and fascism. After years of propaganda against the Jews, which started in the early 30s, and partly under the leadership of Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, the German ambassador Fritz Grobba, and later an anti-British government, the situation reached its peak when the government of anti-British and Nazi sympathizer Rashid Ali al-Gailani was toppled. Precisely on the festival of Shavuot, the 1st and the 2nd of June 1941, a mob, included some policemen even, attacked the Jews in their houses and businesses and in the streets. 2 nights of killing, raping, looting, and raiding Jewish businesses. There isn't exactly a number. There was a report made by the government, and now I don't know how much you can rely on these reports, but the numbers is around 179 people were killed. That's men, women, children, and over 1,000 injured. And the damage to the businesses was in thousands of dinars. It's called actually the Iraqi Kristallnacht, and in Arabic it's called Farhud, which is now became part of the slang. When you want to talk about any looting, you call it Farhud, because this is what happened. In 1948, the Iraqi army participated in the independence war and was defeated like all other Arab armies. So they take their revenge on the Jews by persecuting them, including not permitting them to leave Iraq. So they became like prisoners in their own country. The hanging of Shafiq Adas, who was one of the most prominent businessmen in Iraq, who had even contacts with the royal family, was hanged outside his house in Basra. This is the straw that broke the camel's back. People started fearing that the Farhud will be again. So people started to escape through the borders of the south of Iraq to Iran. In 1950, the Iraqi government passed a special bill that permitted Jews to leave Iraq, but on one condition, that they renounce their nationality. Sort of one-way ticket. not to come back. This happened as well in other countries, not only in Iraq. They would stamp on their passport, no return. The only country that was able to absorb these immigrants was Israel. Israel's population in 1948 was 806,000. Suddenly, nearly a million, or probably 850,000 immigrants from all Arab countries arrived to Israel. So you can imagine a country 2 years old or 3 years old absorbing such a big quantity of immigrants, and from day one they are part of Israel. So they let them travel. It was in the beginning from Baghdad to Cyprus, and then from Cyprus another flight to Tel Aviv. But at a later stage it was direct from the Baghdad airport to Tel Aviv airport. Now they are regretting. A lot of people are saying, oh, we shouldn't have let you go, and she did. Too late. A year later, in 1951, another law was passed that anyone who renounced their nationality will lose their property. They just froze properties and assets. So people were still in Iraq, and actually they lost everything. So they became penniless in one day. So most of the Jews, around 122, 125,000, left Iraq, and the majority of them, 95%, probably went to Israel, stayed in Israel. The number of Jews at that time was 135, so you can imagine. It's the majority left Iraq. Now, I jump again. Carmen and Sharon and myself, we lived in Iraq at a later stage, when our parents decided to stay. Despite all this, they decided to stay. Because I think each one has a reason, okay? I can only talk about myself. My father felt he's Iraqi. And, it's bad now, but it will get better. But at the end of the day, in 1973, he had to leave. There was no more Jews. So I'll go to a period which is more relating to us. In 1958, a military coup toppled the monarchy, and Jews at that period were treated somewhat good by the new leadership. 6 years later, 1963, another military coup, toppling the previous leadership. It was led by a racist officers. Jews were again not permitted to travel, and other discriminating laws were imposed on them. The peak was when the Jews were ordered to carry a yellow ID. Now, they chose yellow. They didn't choose red or blue. There is a reason for that. I don't need to remind you what happened in Germany and other places. Now, this ID, we have to use it everywhere we go to identify us, and this is only given to Jews. So wherever you go, without even opening, they know you're a Jew, to single them out. The idea of escaping started again. If, it's getting worse, and we are less and less people, and we'll be more vulnerable. So when we grew up, we were about 3,000 people only. I mean, within 20 years, from 135 to 3,000. So in 1967, the Six-Day War, the defeat of Arab armies in the war, again, they bashed the Jews. Then in 1968, another military coup that brought the Ba'ath Party, Saddam Hussein. You obviously heard about him. So this is when they controlled Iraq for 40 years. Now, I would like to now ask Sharon and Carmen to talk about their experience, because now we are in the 60s when we remember things,
Okay.
right?
I'll go a little bit further
Please
back.
do.
I will go back 2,600 years ago when my family was brought as captives to Iraq. My family name is Mani, and Mani is the acronym for Minetzer Yeshai. So Minetzer Yeshai means belonging to the King David dynasty. So when the Jews were brought,
Is it on?
yeah, it's on.
Okay.
So when the Jews were brought from Jerusalem to
I don't think
Iraq-
it's on. I don't think it's on.
Can you hear me? No. How about now? No.
Try it now.
How about now? Yeah. So when the Jews were brought captives to Iraq in 586 BC, the king at the time was Joachim, and Joachim was the king. So everybody was calling him Your Excellency, Your Excellency. So he told him, don't call me Your Excellency, because then they will know I'm the king, they will kill me. So just call me Mani, Minetzer Yeshai. And this way, so this is the story that my parents told me. How true it is, I don't know. But it's a nice story. So we stayed in Iraq all along, and everybody in my family left Iraq in 1950s when they were denationalized and they went to Israel. So my family, my father, my mother, my siblings, we were the only unit that stayed in Iraq, without cousins, without uncles, without aunts, without nobody. And we didn't feel really lonely growing up in Iraq, because the Iraqi Jews formed a community. We all went to the same school. Before the 1950s, there were about 40 Jewish schools to accommodate the 150,000 population of the Jews. But after the Jews left, all the Jews were concentrated in one school, which is the Frankinia and the Shamash High School, and all the Jews went to this school, and we formed our own community and our own families. So we didn't really feel like our parents, our families are somewhere else. And that was the school that contained us after the Six-Day War, when the situation became really very, very bad for the Jews. And that's what gave us strength to go on. So every person in the Jewish community will have his own story, but the story will always be the same. That somebody in the family was taken to jail, somebody in the family disappeared. It's all around the same thing. So I will talk about my own brother who was taken to jail.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, what was before 67? Did you have any problem before 67?
Before 67, it was absolutely normal.
Although the government wasn't really in favor of Jews or things like that, but life was normal.
Life was, for us, like I was about 14, 15 years old. To me, it was normal because I was able to go to school, I was able to get together with my friends. And in general, parents did not talk about how they felt in front of the little kids, because they were afraid the little kids will go outside and talk, and they will say something about the parents that will attract the attention of the security people. So we didn't know really much about what our parents knew and how they felt.
Okay.
So to us, as a young kids, it was normal.
Normal, okay. I want to ask the same thing to Carmen, please. Do you remember anything before 60? Because 67, for us, 67, the 6 Days War, it was a cut. We can tell before and after. So just to give you a background, how we felt, even the small community, how we felt before the 6 Days War. Carmen, do you remember?
Yes, I think after the revolution of 1963, where we could no longer leave the country, a lot of people who worked in commerce, Tijjar, they actually could no longer do what they were doing. Licenses were not given to them to import goods. So yes, things started to deteriorate. There was a time during that period when students could not go to university. I think, from memory, my uncle had to miss a year of university, but then he actually did finish his university. So yes, things did deteriorate.
But you, as a person, you didn't feel anything
No,
as a child?
No, I think I'm exactly like Sharon says. I mean, we were children. One thing we did do, though, before the 67 war, if I'm not mistaken, my parents used to listen to the Iranian radio Ahwaz from the south, and that's the only place where we actually could get any decent news about what was happening in Iraq, because of course we never heard what was going on in the country. And the other thing was the Voice of America from Beirut, from Lebanon. Well, I think probably that was a little bit more fun. We used to get all the, the songs and, you know, being part of the West, I guess.
Okay, while we're with you, and then we'll pass on to Sharon. 1967, what happened?
I was not at the same school for my elementary school. I was at a different Jewish school. And on that, literally on the day of the war, we did have in our school, we had Christians and Muslims as well, of course, majority Jews. On that day, they actually, the boys particularly, the non-Jewish boys, came into the schoolyard and sort of with their feet put a little line and said, "You cannot cross into my side. This is non-Jewish side." And this was at a Jewish school.
Exactly.
So that was, I mean, it really did hit us in the face on that particular day. And it was the beginning of the end, because then you knew that considering we're a majority at that school, they still had the goal of saying to us, "This is our side, you can't cross to it." I mean, of course, we didn't take any notice of them, but that was beside the point. But for children to do that, I was 10 years old at the time, so.
Did you hear of any arrests?
Yes, after the 6-day war, arrests started, but they were mainly with the security service, prisons, whatever the word prison may mean. It doesn't mean it's a cell with sort of bars as we know it. But the arrests, or at least the imprisonment period, was quite short at the time. And the families of the prisoners were allowed to see them or hear from them or take clothes to them or food to them. So during that particular year, things were not too bad, but people were terribly, terribly frightened. I mean, the fear started there. And if I may just continue, the thing that happened that I remember very well after the war immediately is our telephones were taken from us. So we had no phones. In a way, it was good, so no one can say, "Oh, well, you said this, which means you are a spy." But if you wanted to pass a message, you actually had to go by car to whoever it is, and we lived without phones until we left.
And be followed by the police?
That came afterwards, yeah.
Okay. Sharon, can you tell us what happened after the 6-day war, after 67, if you experienced anything with your family?
The first thing we experienced is the relationship between us and our neighbors or our Muslim friends, because they immediately started withdrawing their friendship from us. And because all my family, the uncles, aunts are in Israel, and people in Iraq, they know that. So they were saying to us, yeah, you are probably thinking of going to Israel and joining your families there, which was like accusing us of treason, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that carries with it severe punishment, so it scared us.
So people were actually arrested from 67, 68. Tell me what happened in January 1969.
In 69, my brother was taken, so I was home. I have 4 brothers and a sister, and my father and mother. And for some reason, nobody was at home except me. And somebody rings the bell. I open the door, and I see 3 men in uniform, and they say, "We came to search the house." I wasn't really scared because by then, in '69, we have heard so many stories, so it was just a question of time before it comes to us. So I allowed them in, and they started ransacking the home.
How old were you?
I was 15 years old.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, I need to calm them down. So I went and I brought them glasses of water, and I offered them water on a tray with respect. And they cooled down a little bit, and they filled up many, many bags with all kinds of items from the house, everything. And then they asked, meanwhile, while they were searching the house, my brothers, 4 brothers, 2 of them came home, and they saw what's going on. And they said, we came to take your eldest brother to jail, telling us, and because he's not home, we are going to take my 3rd brother as a hostage, and we'll come back in 3 hours.
So they go for one, they don't find him, they take his brother as a deposit until the first one comes.
And sure enough, they come back after 3 hours, and by then they have rounded up a few more Jews. They went around searching other Jewish homes, taking other prisoners. Then they come back 3 hours later, and they exchange one brother for the other. And they take my brother to, we don't know where they took him. No information. So you can imagine how the atmosphere immediately changed at home.
Did they say why they arresting him?
They said we are going to ask him a few questions and we'll bring him back. But we know, we have heard this before.
Yeah, they do that with everyone.
They do that. We have heard it so many times, so we knew it's not going to be very, very soon. And we were scared, yeah.
Yeah. So they've taken your brother, they arrested him.
And we were in a very special situation because my father is Indian and we had Indian nationality. So they take my brother, we don't know where they took him. And of course, the next day, that was in the evening, like 6 o'clock in the evening. So the next day, early in the morning, my parents go to the Indian embassy and they ask the ambassador to intervene. And he says, okay, leave it with us. And we wait and wait for about 4 days. And of course, we are all the time in touch trying to see what's happening. And then the Indian ambassador in Iraq tells my parents, we were able to get him out this time, but next time we won't be able to get him out. So my advice to you is he should leave immediately. So given that we had Indian passport, my brother left within 2 weeks. He left Iraq, went to Iran, and we stayed behind.
Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. Carmen, you used to travel a lot in Iraq, right?
Yeah.
Used to go to the north of Iraq usually because in the north of Iraq is much cooler than Baghdad. So in the summer, a lot of people go for, summer holiday in the north of Iraq. So in 1970, August, you went to Salah ad-Din.
Yes.
On the usual summer holiday.
Correct.
Can you tell us what happened?
We rented a house to stay there for a month, and we took our food with us. Where I come from quite a religious family, and we were quite happy there. we had heard that Jews were escaping. Well, we knew the Jews were escaping through the north, not actually quite further than where we were, but all the same. Anyway, one afternoon we had the knock on the door. We all got so used to the knock on the door, which was quite interesting considering it was not our home. And it was the Secret Service. 3 men came. I recall their boss. He was wearing a very nice suit with a tie, very tall man.
How old were you?
13. I had to think. And he said that we ought to go and join our friends in Erbil. Erbil is the capital of the northern region. And we were, no, thank you, we're very happy where we are. No, you've got to get everything now, and we're going to take you to Erbil. So we actually had to hastily put all our things in bags and things, literally food and everything. And he did suggest that they ought to take my father on his own, and then that my mother and the 3 children ought to go separately. I recall my mother, actually, she's a very short lady, jumping, literally physically jumping on this man who was quite tall, beating him on his chest, and saying, "You are never going to take my husband from me like you did the year before," because it was another issue, unfortunately, that my father was taken into prison quite dangerously for 4 months. So my father was so horrified at what he saw my mother do. He was actually trying to pull her away from this man, who actually was quite gentle and called her auntie. Anyhow, off we go in a car down to Erbil. Interestingly enough, my mother was trying to give him some food to eat because, generally speaking, with the Muslim or Arabs, if you exchange bread and salt, as we say, you sort of become brothers, sisters, friends. He did not want to eat our food because he obviously was the jailer. Anyway, that evening we did arrive to Erbil, to the police station, and what should we see? My goodness me, tens of Iraqis there, all our friends. There were no interrogations, nothing. I mean, we had nowhere to sit. We were all sitting on the floor. Other than our family, everybody else was trying to escape. And the sad thing for the others is that they had to get rid of all the jewelry, all the money they had with them, because they just did not want anybody to see it. So I'm sure farmers found diamonds and I don't know what, emeralds sort of just strewn everywhere. And of course the toilet got blocked because I kept trying to put money down there. They did take our money, and they took Dad's prayer book, which was returned to him within 2 to 3 days. But anyway, the next day we were taken in buses to Baghdad, where we were put in the Baha'i temple, Baha'i meeting rooms for 17 days. And in fact, as we took our food with us, we had a chicken that had gone off, and I was allowed to take the chicken out with a guard to throw it away. And one of the ladies here, I think your Giselle's mother, lived opposite. Giselle's, your sister-in-law, lived opposite, and she saw me. You did. And they said, "Oh, we've just seen Esperance's daughter, so they are in prison." So that's one reason, that's how the family got told about it. And in fact, while I was being interrogated about 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a young man sitting next to the person, the interrogator, and they were asking one of the questions, "Who are your cousins?" They wanted their names and everything. And I actually said the name of my cousin, and apparently he was in the same school as my cousin. My cousin did not go to a Jewish school. So he said, "Oh, I saw your cousin yesterday in prison." So.
Now, there were 137.
136.
136 people. The majority were aiming to escape through the border of Kurdistan to Iran again. But Carmen's family didn't. but for them it's the same thing. Now, I just wanted to make a point that anyone who tried to escape, obviously, they need to make sure not to show that they're escaping. So what they would take from a house that they built for 50, 60, 30 years, they can take only one bag. That shows that actually you're going on holiday. So you can imagine taking a bag with the essentials, with, set of clothes, underwear, things like that. Try to put your jewelry and your money shoved in places and close the door, lock it, and never come back. So it's a part of the freezing of assets that happened in the 50s. This is what happened to a lot of people who had to escape. I want to go back to Sharon, because your brother was actually arrested in January 69. And towards the end of January 69, they picked up a lot of people, men, and they actually, how shall I say, it was a show, it wasn't a court. They put them in front of a military court, and they accused them of spying to Israel. Now, few of them were quite young. One of them was 16. And they convinced him to sign a paper to say that he's 18 so they can actually try him. With my work, I have a YouTube channel. I interview people, unfortunately in Arabic, because it's very important for me that the Iraqis know the history of the Jews that they never met. Because majority of people don't know. I mean, I get a lot of, on my YouTube channel, on my TikTok, we didn't know there were Jews in Iraq. We were 2,600 years. We were before Islam actually arrived to Iraq. So, they wiped us, they wiped the history of the Jews. So, so do you remember the 27th of January, 1969?
27th of January, actually we went to school. And my brother was still in Iraq, and I remember very well, I was in the front court, and we didn't know what happened. And then my brother comes, and he says, they hang them. So that was another watershed moment for us. It's that anything goes. So the bell rang, we went into our classes, and then Ustad Ishaq, our deputy head, comes into the classroom and says, very silently, pack, and each of you goes to we used to have school buses that took us home, and they say, very silently pack and go to your buses and go home. And I really remember when we went home, you can drop a pin on the floor and you can hear that pin. It was such a dead silence. Nobody could even utter a word. But outside the homes, there was a huge celebrations. Iraqis went to the Liberation Square. That's where the...
Yeah, so just to give a bit of background, they hanged 9 Jews in the central square of Baghdad. Can you imagine here, Oxford Street or somewhere, Trafalgar Square, hanging bodies that actually they killed them the night before and they hanged them there for display. Sharon, yeah, what happened?
So I have brothers who were at the university at the time. So basically the universities asked the students to go and celebrate the hanging of the quote-unquote traitors. So my brothers did go to the Liberation Square. They had to go. But we at home, we were just paralyzed. We couldn't move. Even I, at the age of 14, I was we knew something very, very drastic has happened, and it was probably the beginning of worse things to come now. Then my brothers came from the square, and they were unable to even say anything. They were so much in a shock. They were. So we just sat, and we sat very, very quietly. We sat by. We used to turn on to the BBC to hear the comments, to the news, with all the curtains drawn down, and very softly, my father, my brothers would listen to the news in English. We young girls, we were not supposed to know anything. And when they kept
It's to protect you, Sharon.
to protect
It's really,
us,
they
yeah,
tried to
yeah.
protect us.
But just very interestingly is that when they came to search our home, one of the things they took a cassette player and cassettes. Most of the cassettes had the music on it, but some of the cassettes had recordings from the BBC News.
Wow.
So that was not very funny at the time. And when they returned the cassette player had the cassette where they were reporting, BBC was reporting on the victory of the Israelis, how they defeated 7 Arab armies in 6 days. So that was a little bit.
Yeah. With all this, we all had an idea that there is a safe haven somewhere, that there is Israel somewhere
Yeah.
that we can go
Yes.
and be in peace and not being, followed or accused of anything.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, even today, with the rise of anti-Semitism,
Absolutely.
I always have in the back of my mind there is Israel.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Always.
So Sharon, what happened after that when you all left in installment?
We gradually left until the last installment left in August '69.
And where did you go?
So some of us went to the U.S., some of us went to Israel. We were scattered, just like most Jews, I think. After being a very coherent unit in Iraq, once we left Iraq, everybody had a different route.
And you stayed in Israel for how many years, and what did you do?
So I stayed in Israel for 10 years. I studied literature, ended up working in translation in the American Embassy. And after 10 years, I went to the US. And there I got my MBA, got into banking.
And then you got married and had children,
I
and
got
then
married and went around a little bit, ended up in London, became a teacher here, taught business studies for 15 years.
and Israel is still a place that.
Israel is always a place. It's home.
Carmen, what happened after you were released from this temple prison?
Temple prison. Well, we were released on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. So I think at that stage we realized we really must get going. What is terribly sad is that I do not have one single photo of me as a child. We burned everything. And I recall, thousands and thousands of photographs. That's just for example. We were terribly fortunate that we were able to leave by passport at the end of 1971. And it was miraculous because my father, who was in 1969 in what was called the Palace of the Flowers, which was the Palace of the King. When the Ba'ath Party came in '68, it was renamed the Palace of the End. Generally speaking, when people went there, they never came out again. Whoever survived the Palace of the End, Qasr al-Nihaya, were told they will never be able to travel by passport. So my father was one of the very few people that I know of, if not the only one, who actually managed to get a passport. and we left in December 1971.
Because just a very important point is when I think I don't know how many, over 1,000 definitely escaped in this era after the hanging and all this.
Must be at least.
Yeah, so they escaped. So the Iraqi government decided, okay, now we can give the Jews the ability to apply for a passport and leave legally. Now, leaving legally is still if you don't come back as a Jew. If you don't come back to Iraq within 3 months, all your assets are frozen and your nationality is you're denationalized. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So.
There is another point to add, which is to do with freezing of assets, which was not exactly in 1970. There was a law was brought in against the Jews, where 10% of any land owned by Jews were taken away. Now we still have the documents related. My father's family had land in the province of Hilla, where Babylon actually is. And we have the documents that said before the law, they had so many dunams, which is acreage. And after the law, they have so many acreage. And it really is very, very prescriptive about what my father had, what my uncles. So they did quite a good job on that. And that was just before even everything was frozen. So it was pretty difficult, to say the least. One of the things that we actually did do is my father was somehow allowed to take 5 Sefer Torah scrolls with him, which he took to Israel. So what happened to them in Israel, actually, we don't know, but they did survive all the way there.
Yeah, I mean, her father is actually related to she's from rabbinic family. Yeah, you go back to Ben Ishai,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
a very prominent rabbi, Iraqi rabbi. So you left from Iraq to Beirut, right?
From Baghdad to Beirut. It was an interesting thing, just sort of going. It was very sad knowing we will never ever see our country. And as the plane was going to take off, sort of it went behind a little hill and we could no longer see the terminal. And I remember Mom saying, "Bye-bye, my country." But on the other hand, has this plane taken off yet? I mean, we just needed to just get out. Yes, we did. We went to Beirut. We actually were very fortunate. We spent the new year of 71 into 72 there. From there to Turkey, where we were met by the Jewish agency. At that stage, we had visas to go to Canada, but my father decided we would go to Israel. So we actually went to Israel. I stayed for just under 2 years and then came to London. So that's our little story.
Yeah, I'll just say a very short story as well. My father refused to leave, to escape. So we as well, we waited until 1973. Our family as well went into like installments. My brother left in beginning of 72. Then my sister and myself, we left in 73, April 73. And my father and mother left in August 73. All went to Israel, apart from my brother, who came to study here in Manchester. I myself lived in Israel for 15 years. I finished my degree in fashion design. I studied 2 years politics and international relations. And then I came to this country. And now, talking about this country, sorry, do you want to add anything?
No, but she reminded me, because when I was about to get on the plane, I looked back and I said goodbye Baghdad. I will never see you again.
Yeah.
It is sad to leave one's country,
Yeah.
however difficult things were.
Yeah.
Yeah. I came to this country in 1987, and I can tell you that I'm shocked how it changed. When I had my children here, I sent them to Jewish school, and I had no problem that they're wearing a kippah in the street. Now, I feel exactly like I felt in Iraq. I have to hide my Jewish identity. I forbid my children to wear anything that shows that they are Jews, which is extremely, extremely sad.
Actually, it feels worse than Baghdad, because in Baghdad we lived in middle-class neighborhoods, and at the time, women are dressed up fashionably. And now here, when I walk and I see I'm surrounded by women who are covered, whether with a hijab or with a niqab, where they cover their faces, I get scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I haven't seen this in Baghdad.
Yeah, I just want to end this and then probably open the floor if anyone has a question. We were expelled from Jerusalem to Babylon, and then from Babylon to Jerusalem. And even now, there are some who want us to be expelled from Jerusalem again, and it's extremely sad. I just want to say some things about Israel. I just want you to imagine, as I gave the figures before, Israel's population was 806,000. It absorbed more than 1 million immigrants by 1952. On this Independence Day, Israel's population is 9,727,000. I just got it from the, from the Israeli authorities. There are 7,145,000 Jews, which is 73.5% of the population. There is 21% Muslims, and there is 5.5% other minorities. Within 75 years, Israel today is ranked the 19th out of 195 registered countries in the Human Development Index, 8th in the Global Power Index, 4th in the world ranking of educated countries, 9th in the World Health Index out of 163 countries, 11th in the World Happiness Index. You probably would be surprised with all what's going on with Israel. They're still considered number 11 in the world out of 159 countries. They're 11th. Third out of 144 countries in the ranking of innovative countries in the world. Israel today is the first in the world in planting new trees every year. Second in the world in space science rankings. And first in the world in developing medical patents. And we all should be proud of its achievement. Its achievement is our achievement. Chag Atzmaut Sameach. Anyone has a question?
Thank you, that was wonderful. Really fascinating. So I'm sure there must be a few questions. I'm sorry we're like this evening, but I'll bring this one around so we can hear. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, how many of the Jews are there? Are there any Jews?
There are 3 people.
3.
There would be other people who are probably originally Jews who either assimilated or I would doubt hiding their identity because there's no community to marry and to multiply. So known 3 people. There is one synagogue left, but obviously there's no minyan, so there's 2 ladies and 1 man. So Sorry?
Ba'ath Party.
My question is about the Ba'ath Party, who were founded in fascism, and I believe that Saddam Hussein had a Stalinist twist, which your description sounds very Soviet, and it has those elements in it as well.
His hero was Stalin.
Yeah, hence the moustache, I believe.
No, the moustache is something else, because their coup was on the 8th of February. So the number 8 in Arabic is this way. That's the reason the sign of the moustache.
Given what happened subsequently with Saddam Hussein and capture and all these terrible things, the outlook for the Jewish community had any remained was dire, wasn't it? And it was just completely, when you look at what happened to other communities.
Well, in Iraq.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I always say they practiced on us. So, when you want to hurt or change something, you start with the weakest link. Because once you break the weakest link, you can break other things. You practice and you know where's the weakest. And the Jews, being what's left, were the smallest minority. So they started with them. And they continued, and they continued. And if you see what's happening in Iraq now, I mean, Christianity was a second, probably I would say the second biggest minority in Iraq, not even more than the Jews. In Iraq, in all of Iraq now, there's only 100,000 Christians. In 2003, there were 1.25 million. Okay? There is another religion called Mandaean, and they are very ancient religion in Iraq. I don't have the figures how much were there, but there's only 3,000 now all over Iraq. They did the same thing with the Yazidis, you probably heard about. All the minorities, and now they're killing each other. They're killing Shiites and Sunnis, they kill each other in thousands. So, it's quite sad actually. It's a beautiful country and it has a lot of history. If they only managed to do something in 2003, Iraq would have been it's a rich country with oil, with other resources, with a lot of things, and religious sites for every religion. It would have been heaven. But unfortunately, I had a lot of hopes in 2003. For me, just a short story is when I left Iraq, I was nearly 16. I left Iraq by passport, and for me, it just literally, Carmen's mom said bye-bye. I didn't say bye-bye. I'm probably more like Sharon. I just left it behind. I didn't want to know anything about it. I kept the tradition. I kept, food and music and all this. But for me, it was a book, not a chapter, a book that I closed. I don't want even to look at it. In 2003, everything changed. I changed 180 degrees. Suddenly, I want to be involved. Suddenly, I want things to happen. I want to talk. I want to meet. And unfortunately, the dream that I had collapsed completely.
It's not the happiest place in the head, but it's absolutely fascinating talk. I think we'll all agree. So thank you so much to all of you for your contributions. It's brought it to life. Some of us know some of the information, but you've brought it to life. And also the emphasis that maybe we forget too easily that Jews have been in Baghdad for 2,600 years. How long do you have to be in a place to be accepted? 2,600 years is not of Israel for all of us.
Absolutely.
Those of us who don't live there, we have relatives there, and we know that in our mental suitcase, it's on its way to Israel if it ever needs to get back.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you so much for coming and
Thank you.
allowing us to think about Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut today, and for making this contribution. We're small in number, but we've really enjoyed it. It's been so interesting.
Thank you.
So
We loved it. And I think we need to end it in a very good note, that we have Israel.